Imagine a world millions of years in the future. A world where evolution has written a new chapter in the story of life. The world is inhabited by very strange creatures, like nothing the Earth has ever seen. 5 million years in the future, and the planet is in the grip of another ice age. Yet this isn't ice or snow. It's salt, covering a hot, parched desert. But there is life here. Cryptiles, half-meter-long lizards that sprint over the burning salt. These harsh salt flats are 2,000 meters below sea level. They're all that's left of the sparkling, clear blue waters of the Mediterranean. But how can a whole sea just disappear? What happened to turn the holiday paradise of the Mediterranean into a salt desert? An ice age climate is very dry, which makes water evaporate and sea levels fall. But it takes more than a change in climate to make the Mediterranean dry out. In 5 million years' time, the geography of the Earth will have changed, when Africa will have pushed up against Europe and closed the Straits of Gibraltar. As the continents collide, the Mediterranean is cut off from the Atlantic and it becomes a closed, landlocked sea. The water evaporated in the dry climate, and with no water flowing in from the Atlantic to replace it, the Mediterranean simply vanished, leaving just a few deep basins.
The Mediterranean will dry out until it becomes one vast salt pan. There will be small lakes of hypersaline water left behind, the only water in the Mediterranean. But the old holiday islands of Cyprus and Malta and Crete will stand up as small mountains in the middle of this sea of salt.
No shelter and no water, just the relentless sun. But if anything can survive out here, lizards can. These cryptiles, like many lizards, are tough and drought resistant, so they're already suited to life on the salt flats.
Well, in 5 million years, the Mediterranean will be a very different environment than it is today. And very few animals will have actually adapted purely for that new environment. The cryptile is a great example of one animal that's testing the water. It's part of the way there, but not all the way there yet.
Lizards in general are good at surviving in hot, dry places. Today, the Lake Eyre dragon lives on the vast salt flats of Australia's Lake Eyre, a dry salt pan covering 10,000 square kilometers. Lake Eyre dragons eat ants. Insects are the only other creatures that can survive in a salt desert like this. The lizards stand on their heels, keeping their toes off the hot surface. At over 2 million square kilometers, the Mediterranean salt flats are some 200 times as big as Lake Eyre. But cryptiles don't just live here. They also carry out their courtship on the old Mediterranean seabed. The males compete to show off the biggest and brightest crest. And the female invites the best-looking male to follow her in a courtship dash over the salt. If he keeps up with her, she'll let him mate. But for the female, her problems are only just beginning.
Now, one of the biggest problems about living in this environment, this very, very salty environment, is that if you're a lizard, there's nowhere to lay your eggs. If you dig a hole in the salt and lay them, they will just shrivel up. All the water will be taken out of them and they will be dead very quickly. So the females have to move away to find places where there's soil in order to deposit their eggs. This is a time when they're the greatest danger, because they're very well adapted for living on the open salt plain. The colour, the shape, everything is for salt plain life. When they go onto the soil, this is when they stand out like a sore thumb, and this is when they're open to be eaten by predators.
So a female has to leave the safety of the salt flats to lay her eggs. She heads for the old Mediterranean islands that rise out of the salt. These are mountains of bare rock worn into a broken, cracked pavement known as karst. Running across the karst, there are deep cracks and crevices called grikes. Although many of the cracks are only a few centimeters wide, some of them go down 2 or 3 meters. Ideal places to lay eggs. The narrowest cracks are far too tight for a predator. And there is a predator here that uses the bigger grikes as secret highways across the karst. The cryptile's eggs are safe in the bottom of a narrow grike. It's not the eggs that are in danger, but the cryptile herself, from a griken. The cryptile has the advantage of speed, so the griken will go hungry. Grikens live only on these isolated bare mountains and rocky plateaus. They're about 20 centimeters tall at the shoulder, with a sinewy body small enough to wriggle through crevices in the rock. But its ancestor had a very different lifestyle, living in the tops of trees. Today, Europe's natural vegetation is forest, and it's said if humans hadn't cleared the trees, a squirrel could run from Spain to Greece without ever touching the ground. But it would be followed all the way by a pine marten, the ancestor of the griken. Pine martens are fast, agile predators that spend most of their time in the branches. Their bodies are flexible and supple, and they have a superb sense of balance. But 5 million years in the future, in the Ice Age climate, trees will be a rare sight in Europe.
Griken has evolved in only 5 million years. It's not that different from the pine marten it evolved from, but the climate has dried, the trees have gone. Pine martens had long back legs to help them leap through the trees, and tails they'd use to help them maintain balance.
But grikens are different. They have longer legs, so they can run along the grikes. And as grikens no longer climb trees, they don't need their ancestors' long tail for balance. Their bodies have elongated, so they can squeeze through the narrow crevices in the rocks. Grikens also have dagger-like teeth. They need them to bring down their favorite prey. Small, delicate-looking pigs, scrophers. Scrophers can't run as fast as cryptiles, so they're easier for the Griken to catch. Especially the tender, young pigs. But the big adult males are aggressive. Too aggressive for the Griken.
We're 5 million years in the future, and scrophers are descendants of the wild boar that used to roam over much of Europe and Asia.
Today, wild boars live in rich forests that still cover much of Europe, and they're found in many of the countries surrounding today's Mediterranean. The adults are big, heavy-set animals that can weigh more than 100 kilograms. They have sturdy, strong legs for moving across the soft forest floor. And they root around in the deep woodland soil for insects, worms, tubers, fungi. Their sensitive, flexible snouts unearth anything that's edible. They live in tight-knit family groups of a few adult females with their young and a few juveniles. Despite being at home in the forest, wild boar are just the kind of animals that would survive when their forest home disappears. In the future, they've had to adapt to living on bare limestone, and they had to do it relatively quickly as the climate changed.
The landscape the scrofa lives in has been created very rapidly, perhaps in only a few tens of thousands of years. But the scrofas managed to adapt and live in this landscape because pigs are highly adaptable. They're generalists, they can eat a wide variety of food types, they can live in a lot of habitats. And so the scrofa is one of the species managed to adapt to this new landscape.
Walking over rugged limestone is very different from trundling through a forest. Scrofa legs have become thinner and the bones elongated. They walk on the tips of their toes, giving them a strange, stiff-legged gait. But this is the most efficient way to move over hard surfaces like the karst. The whole animal is only half the height of its bulky wild boar ancestor.
The scrofa is a small pig because it's living in a habitat where there's not a great amount of food. It's got sharp, pointed hoofs to help it move across the rocky surface, long, thin legs because it needs to move quite long distances, but also it's got to leap across the cracks in the rocks.
A pig that walks like a ballerina may seem unlikely. But there is a creature around today that has a similar design. The klipspringer. Klipspringer are antelopes that live on rocky outcrops in Africa. And they've also evolved the same tiptoe, stiff-legged gait to scramble over bare rock. The klipspringer and scrofa are totally unrelated, but have evolved the same solution to the same problem. And so they look very similar. In the future, scrofas have solved the problem of moving over rock, but there's another problem to solve.
There's not a great amount of food in this landscape, and the scrofa has a very long pointed snout, so it can actually poke down into the grikes in the rocks to find the bits of plant that are growing there. It's particularly after the roots, the tubers, the bulbs, anything that's edible.
And that includes cryptile eggs, if they're not laid deep enough. But sticking a long snout down a grike can be dangerous. Although a griken won't attack an adult scrofa, it'll sneak up on any youngsters that wander away from the family. uses the cover of the grikes to creep closer and closer. An isolated young scrofa has no defense out in the open. The scrofa family scatters, and the Gryken finally makes a kill. This is a huge, featureless landscape, and it's very easy to get lost. And surrounding the rocky islands, the harsh, endless salt flats. The worst place a young scrofa could find itself. But in all the confusion after the kill, one of the baby scrofas has lost its way. It may be an ice age, but out here, in the blinding glare of the salt, 2,000 meters below sea level, it gets hot. 6 degrees hotter than the Mediterranean of today. A young scrofa won't find anything to eat out here, and even more critically, there's nothing to drink. Dehydration is a serious danger for a small pig in this heat. There is water here, but it's lethal, much too salty to drink. Is worse than useless for the poor scrofa.
These hypersaline, very, very salty pools may seem the kind of habitat in which nothing can thrive, but there are animals that positively enjoy such conditions. Like the brine flies that you can find today in Lake Mono, these sorts of creatures will live there in their millions. Animals that have learned to cope with very harsh conditions sometimes profit by it.
This works so well that the air over the Mediterranean brine lakes is black with flies. The flies themselves don't live more than a few days, but they breed so quickly they dominate the landscape. But scrofas can't eat brine flies. Evening brings some relief from the heat, but none from hunger or thirst. Next morning, the fierce heat will return with the sun. It's unlikely that any animal not adapted to these harsh conditions could survive more than a day here in this endless desert. It seems like there's nothing here, just flies, salt, and cryptiles. So if the scrofa has no chance of survival, how do the cryptiles do it? There's plenty of food around the lake. The cryptile trawls through the huge swarms of flies, using its large neck frill as a fishing net. And with its long tongue, it licks the trapped flies off the net as it runs.
The most amazing thing about the cryptile is its frill. It's got this enormous great big frill which is evolved from the skin around its neck to enormous proportions, and it's got cartilage inside so it can actually erect the frill, and so it looks about as big as a saucepan when it faces you. This is the adaptation it's got ready for feeding, because this frill is like a lattice structure. It's full of holes between the scales, and there's a waxy secretion. This has a sticky waxy secretion that covers the frill, so when it runs forward through all these flies and they're scattered in all directions, many of them get caught on this sticky frill. It's a bit like a mobile fly paper, if you like. And then it can turn around with its long tongue and lick off all those flies which it's caught on its frill. Well, the frill itself has probably evolved, as I say, from loose skin from round its neck. Things like the frill lizard living today in Australia has a big frill, so you can see how that would evolve from that. Many other lizards also have a mouth fringe as well, where they can expand the skin on the side of the mouth in order to frighten off predators. A big red flash like this would frighten off a snake or another bigger lizard. So you can see this sort of frill would have actually evolved over the course of time from extra loose skin around the neck. The cryptile is unique. It doesn't drink. It gets all the moisture it needs from the insects, the flies that it feeds on. Flies are full of moisture, and it eats dozens and dozens every day, and that provides it with enough water for it to survive. So it never ever drinks water. It would be fatal if it actually drank some of this water. It's too salty.
So the cryptile survives by eating and drinking flies. But a few lizards make no impact at all on these vast numbers of brine flies. The flies and the lizards can live here because they're very specialized. For anything else, life on the huge salt flats is impossible. The baby scrofa has succumbed to the heat. Life on the barren limestone karst is almost as hard. But for the scrofas and gricans, it's their only home. The Ice Age swept over this world at breathtaking speed, less than 10,000 years. So only those creatures that were adaptable, like lizards, pigs, pine martens, could survive. The Ice Age, 5 million years in the future, didn't just bring frozen wastes. It dried out the Mediterranean Sea to create a vast, unforgiving desert of salt. In 5 million years' time, a huge grassy plain stretches for 3,000 kilometers across the South American landscape. And stalking through the grass, giant birds. But compared to what used to live here, this landscape is very sparsely populated. This vast prairie used to be a rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. Where there is grass, there were once trees stretching from the Andes to the Atlantic. The forests have gone because in 5 million years' time, the Earth has been plunged into another ice age. As the Earth's climate chilled, the ice caps expanded, spreading from the North and South poles into lower latitudes. The climate became colder and drier, and starved of life-giving rain, the Amazon rainforest died out. In the future, only the great river courses support any forest at all. The rest has been replaced by grasslands. Today, the lush Amazon rainforests are teeming with life, one of the richest habitats on the planet. But most of the creatures that live here are far too specialized to survive the death of the rainforest. Creatures such as macaws, sloths, and peccaries are all dependent on the complex forest ecosystem, adapted to fit very particular niches. They stand no chance of surviving when the forest is replaced by grassland. And to make matters worse, the change from forest to grassland happened incredibly quickly, only a few thousand years, a mere blink of an eye in the timescale of evolution. This Amazon prairie is very different from the rainforest. But there was a forest monkey adaptable enough to survive the change. These strange creatures are babucaris. At home on the prairie, babucaris live in big, loose troops scattered through the dense grass. But what kind of present-day Amazonian monkey could adapt to life on the grasslands?
In 5 million years, most of the Amazonian rainforest will have disappeared. At the moment, there's a huge variety of monkeys that live in these forests. Some of them, at least, will have evolved into species and now colonize the grasslands. Perhaps something like the wakari. It's an adaptable animal, it lives in the trees, but it's also an omnivore, it spends time on the ground, it's got a highly evolved social system, and you need a social system if you're going to go out onto the grasslands, because you need lots of monkeys with you to help protect you from predators.
As the trees thinned out, wakaris could adapt their social system to live in bigger and bigger groups. Behavior like this can change quite quickly in evolutionary terms, so the wakari social system could keep up with the rapidly changing habitat. In the future, the babucaris have also inherited the wakaris' bright-coloured heads, but have gone even further. Their faces and bottoms are both bright blue to help the widely scattered troops stay in contact, and so watch out for trouble. Babucaris spread out through the grass as they move, searching a wide area for anything to eat. A large troop means lots of eyes looking out for food. But more important, it also means lots of sentries, keeping a lookout for predators like the giant killer birds that stalk through the long grass. Caterpillars. Like the babucaris, they live in groups. These are hunting parties. Killers are fast, but they don't just run down their victims. Some of the birds split off from the main group. The babucaris are heading into an ambush. Once a babukari is killed, the other caterpillars join the feast. These long-legged monkeys could easily outmaneuver a single caterpillar, so caterpillars have to hunt in groups. Some stalk around the monkey troop unseen in the long grass and wait. Using their colourful crests as signals to each other, the rest of the pack drive the monkeys into the trap. Most of the troop will escape, but one or two will be caught. The ancestor of these giant birds is a grassland predator that's around today.
Caterpillars are one of the characteristic birds of this grassland, but they're big, much bigger than most modern birds, and certainly much bigger than their ancestors. They're about 3 meters tall, but they evolved from these small terrestrial falcons. Caracaras are common in South American grasslands today. They're fairly primitive falcons, but they're quite closely related to the peregrines and kestrels many people are familiar with. But they live on the ground, and they find their prey on the ground, not in the air.
Though caracaras can still fly, their long legs help them forage on the ground. But as the grasslands spread, they became even more efficient ground predators.
The main way that caterpillars have become a really efficient terrestrial predator on the ground is by giving up flight. Flight's expensive, not only in the energy you use to get around, but in the fact that you've got to develop wings and muscles and all the systems that drive them. If you drop that, it then becomes much easier to invest the energy, evolutionarily, in becoming faster. And the best way of becoming faster is to be bigger.
And that's exactly what happened to the caracara, the ancestor of the mighty caterpillar. Size change can happen quickly in evolutionary terms, and 5 million years is plenty of time for the caracara to evolve into a 3-meter-tall caterpillar. It's also enough time for this bird to evolve some impressive ways of killing its prey.
We know that by manipulating the genetics, you can very easily trigger a modern bird to develop a claw. The claw goes right back to their dinosaur ancestors. Same morphology, same position on the wings. And this has been re-evolved in the caterpillar. It's developed this large sickle-shaped claw, just like the claws of dinosaurs, and it's using it in exactly the same way. It can catch and grab the prey, and it can disembowel it and tear the prey up before it eats it.
Caterpillars are fearsome enough on their own, but in groups, they're lethal. Babakari's social behavior has evolved in response to such predators. But surviving in the grasslands has taken much more than just a change in behavior.
Life on the grassland involves travelling long distances. Your food is widely scattered and you've got to be able to move fast if a predator approaches. So these animals have developed long, supple limbs to cover long distances, and it also helps them forage more effectively. They can put their hands into crevices, they can dig, they can look for food.
Babukaris have a primate's dexterous hands and a primate's intelligence, and they use both to find food. There are small, shallow lakes scattered all across the grasslands. And around the edges of the lakes are strange woven baskets that look almost man-made. These baskets are woven from grass and twigs and provide shelter from predators for hordes of small fish. They're fish traps, made by the Babukaris. These lakes are full of fish, so it doesn't take long for the trap to fill up. The lakes are a regular stop for the Babukaris as they patrol their territory. The older monkeys are the most skillful at making the traps. The youngsters watch them and learn how it's done. The monkeys need this fish protein to supplement their rather sparse diet from the Amazon prairies.
Food is not particularly abundant in these grasslands, and the Babukari troops have to travel long distances each day looking for food. They're basically omnivores. They'll eat plant material, they'll eat roots, tubers, insects, any small mammals they can catch. Basically, they have to exploit any food source they can find. And one way they actually supplement their diet is eating fish. There's waters out there on the plains, streams and ponds, and these things have managed to weave small traps made out of bits of twig and grass. They throw them into the streams, they leave them there, and periodically as the troop passes, they pull them out. Fish will shelter in them and they'll eat the fish. It supplements their diet, and it's a skill they need in this arid landscape. Other primates do much the same.
Today, chimps use tools to help them find food. Certain troops have learned to strip down twigs and poke them into termite nests to pull out the juicy insects. This skill needs intelligence as well as nimble fingers to manipulate the primitive tools. But using tools like this isn't instinctive. Mothers have to teach their infants how it's done. In the future, tool use, building elaborate fish traps, helps Babukaris survive. And being large gives the Karakilla an edge. But there are yet other ways of adapting to life here. This is a rattleback. Rattlebacks are very territorial. When two rattlebacks meet, they perform a noisy display by rattling large heavy plates on their backs. The loudest wins, and the loser retires gracefully.
The rattleback is a rodent. Rodents are highly successful animals. About 40% of all the mammals alive today are rodents. They're adaptable, they can live in a wide variety of habitats. The rattleback probably evolved from some large South American rodent that lived on the forest floor, something like a paca or an agouti. Moved out onto the grasslands as they evolved, but out on the grasslands is exposed to predators. The agoutis and the pacas can rely on cover, they can hide in the forest. The rattleback's got nowhere to hide, so as it moved onto the grassland, it had to develop some form of protection, hence the plates on its back.
The plates are used for territorial displays, but they're mainly for defense, as the rattleback's ancestors evolved to cope with the rapid loss of forest cover. But evolving armor wasn't that difficult for those forest rodents. The plates are only made from hair, but it's become matted and fused like rhino horn. There are creatures today with similar armor to rattlebacks, but they're not rodents. These are pangolins. They look like animated pine cones. And if threatened, curl into a tight ball, making themselves impregnable. In the future, rattlebacks don't just curl up. They have another way to protect themselves. A fringe of long, tough spines along each side of the rattleback stick into the earth as it hunkers down. Muscles at the base of the spines lock them in place. It's almost impossible for anything to dislodge it. They need this extra degree of protection because of what they eat. Eggs. But not just any eggs. This is a caterpillar nest, containing a dozen large eggs.
Caterpillars breed communally. It's essential for them. If they laid individual nests distributed over a big area, those nests would all be vulnerable to predation. But by nesting in a group, and using a single nest, the animals have got much greater safety. The females lay their eggs in a single nest, each one laying an egg or two in turn.
All the eggs are incubated by the male caterpillar, who only leaves his duties briefly to find food. But it's enough time for the rattleback to find the nest. The nest isn't left unguarded for long. Being caught red-handed doesn't worry a rattleback. Those tough scales are strong enough to survive even an angry caterpillar. Although the Earth is in the grip of an ice age, the tropical summer is still warm and brings massive thunderstorms. Sometimes these storms bring rain to the parched landscape. But at the end of the summer, the grass is tinder dry. Storms build up every afternoon, and everyone waits for some relief from the stifling heat. But these storms don't always bring rain. More often, they bring fire.
One of the features of savanna habitat is it burns. Any number of events, perhaps a glint of sunlight off something shiny, perhaps a lightning strike, will trigger a fire. And fire is essential to the ecosystem. It's part of the life cycle of the vegetation, because the next generation of plants, the grass or trees or whatever, will only usually set seed after grass has burnt.
Fire is a crucial part of life in all grasslands. It may look destructive, but it's good news for many creatures. Today, storks are drawn to the fire edge to feed on insects, reptiles or mammals, flushed into the open by the flames. But, more important, fire turns dead, dry grass into a rich ash. This fertilizes the ground, creating a flush of new growth, which in turn feeds grazers. So fire brings new life to the grasslands. Like storks do today, caterpillars of the future feed on the fire edge, running down anything that escapes the flames. Caterpillars can use their speed to stay one step ahead of the wall of fire. The Prairies use their speed to head in the opposite direction. There's nothing for them amongst the flames, except, of course, the caterpillars, their enemies. But some creatures can't outrun the fire. The rattleback has no chance of escaping. As the flames pass, the rattleback seems doomed. But the rattleback's scales are fireproof as well as caterpillar-proof. As long as the fire moves quickly, the rattleback can survive. Fire is not as destructive as it looks. Some animals survive it, others profit by it. Colourful and smart ground-dwelling monkeys. Huge killer birds that hunt in deadly packs. A bizarre, armoured, fireproof rodent. All living on a vast open plain where the Amazon rainforest once stood. Life in these grasslands is very different from life in the forest. But evolution has shaped new creatures with new ways of surviving on these Amazon prairies.